Then there's Brandon Aiyuk, who could be the guy, who could be, this could be the one that Jerry Dulac's talking about, the big name, this is a trade that's coming. Watch out. He knows, because Jerry always knows. Jerry always knows something. I joke with Jerry constantly that, Jerry always knows something. If it is Brandon Aiyuk, not the Bleacher Report tossed out a trade for the Steelers that said, hey, this will probably work. The Steelers give up a first-round pick 20, and the third-round pick 98 for the 49ers, to the 49ers, for Brandon Aiyuk, and a fourth-round pick, 121. I look at that and I say, that's not bad. If you're giving up 2 draft picks, a first and a third, and you're getting a fourth for Brandon Aiyuk, you still walk in there with your wide receiver 1B maybe, your second-round pick, another third-round pick, and 2 fourth-round picks now. Chances are you can move up with 2 of those fourth-round picks. You could be totally fine. The question is, if you're signing them for $30 million, is that going to work? Do you look at this trade and say that's a possibility, and have you moved on completely for the Brandon Aiyuk situation and just said it's way too expensive?
When it comes to the actual trade, I don't hate it. When it comes to paying a wide receiver $30 million on a team that is going to eventually, at some point, have to pay a quarterback, at some point have to pay their offensive line because they're skewing younger, which means eventually the bill is going to come due. And eventually they're going to have to pay, if it's George Pickens, if it's Pat Freiermuth, if it's, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, you have a lot of bills coming for the offensive side. Signing a $30 million wide receiver, although would be great to see a guy in Brandon Aiyuk in Pittsburgh as a receiver. Paying him that much money is kind of what gives me pause, because the trade stock, all that does is essentially solidify Dan Moore as your left tackle this season. I think you still have to get a center, and I think you, at that point, say Dan Moore is your left tackle, and you just pick center and go with a cornerback or something else in the third round. But I do think that the money is still giving me pause. $30 million for a receiver for this offense right now just seems like too much.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you had your quarterback situation in place, $30 million is really tough, but you could make that happen. The Pittsburgh Steelers have the most expensive defense in the NFL. They got to pay Pat Freiermuth. Next year, you're working with George Pickens on an extension. Jaylen Warren, possibly Najee Harris. You got to worry about James Daniels. At some point, you're probably going to have to figure out what's going on at tackle, and hopefully you draft a tackle, and that's totally fine. Nate Herbig's entering the final year of his 2-year deal. I mean, there are question marks here. There are lots of question marks here. At some point, you're going to have to re-sign TJ Watt relatively soon. $30 million for a wide receiver is just not doing it for me. Here's what I want to talk about next. Size matters. We all know it, and it's important to remember it in times of need. I recently went to a small law firm in hopes of getting the compensation I felt I deserved. I didn't, and to this day, I still think about the money that I may have missed out on. I filled out mounds of paperwork, then waited around for what felt like forever, got phone call after phone call telling me what I did not do right in the process, and it was expensive. All to get underwhelming compensation and almost zero satisfaction. Fortunately, if you ever get seriously injured and want to file a claim, you don't have to go through the same hassle I did. Instead, you can make it way easier by finding out if you have a claim in just a few clicks on your phone and working with America's biggest injury law firm with a promise of being for the people. Here comes Morgan & Morgan, today's sponsor. Morgan & Morgan has over 1,000 attorneys working in all 50 states fighting to get their clients the money they deserve. In recent months, they've achieved verdicts for their clients, including one that is worth $26 million. That is 40 times the highest insurance offer. And they're absolutely free unless you win. I got lowballed. Don't make the same mistake I did. Fighting big companies takes a big firm. And with America's biggest injury law firm, you're ready to take on insurance companies of any size. Don't overthink it. You can start your claim in just a few clicks by following the link in our description or by going to www.forthepeople.com/allsteelers. It only takes a few minutes to find out if you have a case. And if you have, it might be worth millions. And I think if the Pittsburgh Steelers are here, and there's a bunch of comments in the chat about how good the Steelers are drafting wide receivers, I think that's why you could go after a guy like Mechie, and you can make that your trade of significance. And then you can look at the NFL draft and say, let's find something else. Let's look at 2 young guys because we're pretty good at finding and developing wide receivers. Maybe they could go that route. I just don't see, like, Brandon Aiyuk may be the name, and I asked about Brandon Aiyuk. I didn't get any responses. Omar Khan was joking left and right about a Brandon Aiyuk trade at the NFL meetings. I just feel like he was joking too much to make it realistic. I don't know. I don't think that that's a possibility for the Steelers. I think that ship really has sailed. And if they're looking at anybody, I see one of these wide receivers in Houston being an answer, maybe a wide receiver elsewhere that's almost on the same lines. I'm just not paying anybody 30 million. I'd pay Justin Jefferson $30 million, and I'd say, chances are he's going to take you to a Super Bowl somehow. But that's about it. I feel like that's the move. And when it comes to this comment here, because this is a good one to address, I thought the 49ers already said that they're not giving up Aiyuk. And I believe the Steelers are not giving up all the draft capital for him. John Lynch, GM of the 49ers, did say that they're trying to work something out, but Aiyuk continues to talk about how that's not really going to happen and how he's open to other teams. And he named the Pittsburgh Steelers as a potential landing spot and one that he'd be happy to go to. It just doesn't feel like, it feels like, John Lynch is talking just because he needs to say the right things. I don't think that offense is built to pay a wide receiver $30 million. I get that they have a cheap quarterback, but you also have Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuels under contract, George Kittle under contract. I don't know. Question marks on the defensive side of the ball. You're trying to win Super Bowls. Wide receivers don't win you Super Bowls, unfortunately, and I think they understand that. I see Aiyuk as a maybe next year in free agency type of option, but this year maybe a trade deadline type of option. I could see that for Aiyuk. I could see, if we want to talk about a realistic trade for Brandon Aiyuk, I could see week 9 coming around and the Steelers are in the playoff hunt. They're looking really good, but they notably need a wide receiver. And Brandon Ayuk's on the market, and they trade for Brandon Aiyuk, and they just trade him for, whatever, a second round pick, a third round pick, and then they kind of use it as a wasted pick. And they say, hey, whatever, let's win a Super Bowl now. We'll move on. We'll see if we could sign him long term, but chances are we can't. We'll move on. Maybe we franchise tag him for a year and we get a third round pick for 2 years. It's not an ideal situation, but if we're going to talk about being realistic, I think that's I think that's the way to go. The more realistic option for the Pittsburgh Steelers.